While most remakes add something to the original, they also end up changing it. The Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy is a great example of this. It expands and changes the original to such a degree that they are completely different games. Even though the remakes do retain a lot of what made the original great, you will still always have the original and probably still want to go back to it from time to time. The Resident Evil series has also seen its fair share of remakes, some changing so many things that the remakes feel like completely new games. But there's one remake in the series that manages to expand upon the original while also remaining true to it. In fact, it just improved upon the original so much that I don't feel that much desire to revisit the PlayStation original. I am of course talking about the remake of the original Resident Evil that first came out on the Gamecube. Even though this remake is quite old, it got an HD remaster and is now playable on modern systems, including Steam. The thing about the remaster is that it still looks and plays incredibly well. How many games of the GameCube era still look and play this good? The character models and backgrounds still look amazing. The remake manages to upgrade the game while still remaining true to the original. In this sense, it just might be the best remake of all time. What's so fascinating about this remake is that it was released only 6 years after the original, which came out on the PlayStation in 1996. 2002 was 22 years ago, and the game still manages to hold up in every way. In fact, the game's pre-rendered backgrounds look quite beautiful even in HD. While some of the backgrounds might show their age in some places, the character models themselves look surprisingly good. Any imperfections seem more like a stylistic choice. The pre-rendered backgrounds were actually a large part of this success, as they allowed the developers to add a lot more detail and focus more on the characters and lighting effects. Code Veronica before it had 3D environments, and it does not hold up as well as this game does. The remake is also a lot darker than the original in terms of lighting, which fits the game well and makes it more eerie. While the original did look great for its time, it just doesn't make sense for the mansion to be as lit up as it is in the PlayStation 1 version. Even with the massive visual upgrade, the remake follows the same premise as the original. Monsters have started to appear near a mansion outside of the city, and Star's Bravo team has been sent to check it out. But contact has been lost, so the Alpha team is sent in after them, and this is where you come in. Your team is attacked by ravenous zombified dogs, and you're forced to take refuge in the nearby Spencer mansion, where the game takes place. You can play as either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, but you need to play both to get the full experience. Jill is a bit easier, so it's best to start with her for new players. The thing that people have the most problem with, going back to the old Resident Evil games, is the tank controls. Before analog sticks, this was a way of allowing you to have the same directional input when the game switched screens. In short, you push up on the D-pad to move forward, down to move backwards, and turn by pressing left or right. This makes maneuvering feel a lot more awkward than other games of the era, especially when compared to a slick platformer like Mario 64. But this was actually part of the charm back in the day. This awkward way of steering made it harder to get away from enemies, which played up the tension. It could also sometimes be hard to aim, leading you to sometimes waste ammo that was sorely needed. In the HD remake, you now have the option to use normal controls instead, and I must admit that I went for this option. You will also lock onto the nearest enemy when you hit the aim button, which is really helpful. You can of course turn these options off if you prefer a more hardcore experience. You also no longer need to hold down a run button, as walking and running is controlled by how far you move the analog stick. The real star of Resident Evil is the mansion itself. It's filled with so much story and character, and gradually exploring it and revealing its secrets is what makes the game so fun and rewarding. The mansion is largely the same as it was in the original, but the remake expands upon it by adding some extra areas. Some of these are shortcuts and make moving around less tedious than in the PlayStation version. Many puzzles have also been expanded, meaning that there's new stuff to challenge you, even if you're fresh off playing the original. Changing things up like this make it feel like the same game as the original while still offering older players something new. This is especially apparent if you just played the original before starting the remake. One scene that has been etched into my memory is a certain jump scare in the beginning part of the game. I still remember that and was waiting for it, but in the remake this jump scare was just teased the first few times you pass through the area, only to happen and scare you for real when you least expect it and least need it, because you are focused on something else. A new addition to the remake is that the zombies remain laying around after you've killed them, unless you kill them via headshots or burn the bodies. The reason for this is that they aren't really dead, but instead come back as crimson heads, which now have claws and are much faster and chase after you. In a game where you need to conserve your ammo as much as possible, this forces you to change your approach. Do you spend ammo on the regular zombie only for it to come back as a crimson head, or do you try to avoid it in its slower regular form? This adds another level of strategy and depth to the game. In the original, Chris was basically hard mode, as he only had 6 item slots as opposed to Jill's 8. Jill also had a lockpick, while Chris had to find small keys throughout the game. Chris has a lighter though that doesn't take up an item slot, which is very useful when burning zombies. Chris is also stronger, runs faster, and can take more damage. He doesn't get the grenade launcher though, and has to leave a flamethrower he gets access to behind, so he's still the more difficult character to play as. But this time around, it feels like you get more out of playing as him as opposed to just having a few changes and an increase in difficulty. The backstory of the mansion is also expanded upon, as you find notes from the architect behind the mansion, George Trevor. He was made use of and disposed by the Spencer family, while his wife, Jessica, along with their daughter, Lisa, were taken by Umbrella and experimented on. Jessica died, but Lisa survived and is still alive when the game takes place, although she is not the same. She's not only a great addition gameplay wise, but her tragic story gives another side to the horrors that took place at the mansion. One thing the original game was criticized for was the horrible voice acting.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
While it's a lot better in the remake, it's still not perfect, but it's more than good enough so that it doesn't take away from the game by becoming an unintended comedic element.
Phew. Barry.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
Really?
The original Resident Evil is still a charming game and worth playing if you liked it back in the day, or want to see where the series started, but this remake really surpasses it in every way. It's essentially the same game as the original, but it expands and improves upon it to make it a better game. I'm really glad Capcom went with the pre-rendered backgrounds in this game, as opposed to remaking it as a completely modern game. Pre-rendered backgrounds was seen as something old, even back in 2002 when the remake was first released, but thanks to it sticking close to the original, it has remained one of the best remakes of all time and is still a game you can come back to again and again. While I really love what Capcom did with Resident Evil 2, I don't have the same desire to see the original remade again, as I find it hard to believe they could ever improve upon this. If you liked the video, please give it a like, subscribe for more, and if you want to see more videos related to Resident Evil, check out this playlist.